He waits no more. Sutekh, the god of death, has returned. But why does he have it in for the Doctor? And what is his plan? That's what we're going to find out right now. We'll go over Sutekh's first and until recently only appearance on Doctor Who in the classic story, The Pyramids of Mars, and then discuss his shocking reemergence in the most recent story, The Legend of Ruby Sunday. Then it's wild theory crafting time. I'm going to go over all the mysteries we've seen this season and all the new revelations we received just last episode and patch together my final predictions for what's going to happen in the upcoming finale. How has Sutekh escaped and merged himself with the TARDIS? How is the Doctor going to stop it? And most importantly, who the heck is Ruby Sunday's mother? Stay tuned to find out. Maybe. Before we get started, I just want to make it clear that I'm going to only be covering the on-screen appearances of Sutekh in this video. I know in my other video I initially said that I wanted to cover the extended material, you know, the audios and comic books and etc. But after I started browsing wikis about Sutekh, I realized that was actually a much larger undertaking than I initially thought. He is a massive figure in the extended universe of Doctor Who. There are tons of comic books, tons of audio stories, tons of books about him. He's got a big, expansive lore to dig into, and I just don't think that I have the time, unfortunately, to do that justice in the next day and a half before the finale premieres. So I hope you forgive me, but for now I'm going to just set that aside. Maybe that'll be a future video project, the extended lore of Sutekh. But for now, we're just going to cover the Pyramids of Mars and the Legend of Ruby Sunday. And aside from that, much like the Toymaker, when Russell T Davies brought him back, nothing that's outside of the television appearances will probably matter at all to the proceedings of the modern iteration of the character. Will all be references to his previous appearance in the Pyramids of Mars, I'm fairly certain. There might be an Easter egg here or there that references his expanded media lore, but as far as stuff you need to know to enjoy the story moving forward, it's really all about knowing the Pyramids of Mars, which is what we're going to go over right now. Sutekh is the god of death. He's also known by the names Set, Seth, Satan, and the Typhonian Beast, as well as many others. He's an ancient warlord, an Osiran. According to the Doctor, he's over 7,000 years old. In his initial appearance, he's framed more as an ancient, all-powerful alien than a true god, but maybe in the modern series they have retconned that, or they'll have some explanation as to how he's attained a true godlike status. The Osirans are a super intelligent, industrious race, known for their guile and cunning. The art, fashion, and architecture of ancient Egypt are based off of the Osiran pattern, as the Doctor puts it. Sutekh is a narcissistic, genocidal sociopath with a literal god complex. He sees all life as his enemy, and seeks nothing short of the utter eradication of all other life in the universe, so that there's only Sutekh.
The alien who dares to intrude, the humans, animals, birds, fish, reptiles. All life is my enemy. All life shall perish under the reign of Sutekh the Destroyer.
The Doctor says that Sutekh hates all life because he fears it growing more powerful than him one day. This means that Sutekh is paranoid, which is exactly the kind of personality trait you want to have in a godlike being with unlimited power. Sutekh counters that all life is nothing compared to the greatness that is Sutekh. So, you know, philosophical differences. He massacred his own people and was chased across the galaxy by a band of 740 Osirans, led by his brother Horus. They found him on Earth in ancient Egypt, and the wars they fought became the basis of Egyptian mythology. Horus and his band of Osirans eventually defeated Sutekh, but rather than killing him, they imprisoned him instead. They believed that killing him would make them no better than he was. So they locked him in a paralyzed state, in a prison buried beneath a pyramid on Earth. The key to the prison, a power source called the Eye of Horus, was built and housed in a pyramid on Mars. Sutekh was doomed to sit immobile for all eternity, a wellspring of power and rage bottled up beneath the sands of Egypt for all time. That is, until one enterprising archaeologist in 1911 discovered the entrance to his hidden chamber. Sutekh has supreme mental power as the primary tool he utilizes to exact his will. He can enter anyone's mind and take them over completely, even the Doctor. He can then puppet and control them, even from hundreds of miles away. He can read minds. He has telekinetic powers. He can even physically contain explosions from occurring with his mind. Although this act does show that he has limits to his power, as it requires a great deal of concentration and energy to maintain. He boasts that he can keep the Doctor alive and in excruciating pain for centuries if he so desired. His minions also gain powers, such as being able to kill with a mere burning touch. And these are just the powers he exhibits while he's imprisoned and muzzled by the Eye of Horus. He also has a cult following of fanatics, obsessed with resurrecting Sutekh and bringing about the end of the world. In Sutekh's latest appearance, apparently free to fully unleash his wrath, he also has the ability to change his form, becoming a dark cloud or turning invisible altogether. He can merge his body with a time machine and survive, even potentially possess it. He can also instantly control and transform people, and then bestow those minions with his powers, such as his other new ability, turning people to sand with a single touch. He also may have the ability to create people, or at least guide them from birth to be his minions. Trailers for next week's episode indicate that he also has the ability to create giant sandstorms, kind of like the Mummy from the Brendan Fraser movies. I'm guessing these clouds also turn people into sand, but we'll have to wait and see. Alright, now it's time to talk about Sutekh's very first appearance in The Pyramids of Mars. The Pyramids of Mars was written by Robert Holmes and Louis Greifer, under the pseudonym of Stephen Harris, and directed by Patty Russell. It was heavily inspired and influenced by the gothic horror genre of film, specifically the Mummy films, such as the 1932 Universal Pictures classic The Mummy, and the Hammer horror films The Mummy and Blood from the Mummy's Tomb. It was initially written by Louis Greifer, but needed several rewrites after submission, and since the writer was no longer available, it was heavily rewritten by Robert Holmes. Robert Holmes is one of the best and most prolific writers of classic Doctor Who, and a personal favorite. He wrote several all-time classics such as Spearhead from Space, The Ark in Space, and The Caves of Androzani, to name a few. They wrote the story in the middle of Philip Hinchcliffe's own gothic horror golden era of Doctor Who. Practically every other story in this period was based off of a classic monster horror trope. The aesthetics and subject matter were borrowed heavily from the Hammer horror films of the era. Practically every classic horror monster got the Doctor Who treatment, including Frankenstein, The Thing, and of course, The Mummy. This is how Sutekh, God of Destruction, came into being. This is the only appearance of the character in the classic series, and up until very recently, the series as a whole. They based the character off of the Egyptian god Set, also known as Seth or Sutekh in ancient texts. Set is the god of deserts, storms, disorder, violence, and foreigners in ancient Egyptian religion. In the most important Egyptian myth, the Osiris myth, Set conspired to usurp the throne by tricking and murdering his brother Osiris. Osiris's wife Isis found his body and magically brought it back to life long enough to conceive a son, Horus. Horus then grew up to seek vengeance upon his murderous uncle. An Egyptian tale known as the Contendings of Horus and Seth details the brutal war fought between these two deities. They fought not just for vengeance, but to determine who would succeed Osiris, ascend to the throne, and rule Egypt itself. Ultimately, Horus was the victor. Set is usually portrayed as a man with a set animal head, or portrayed as a full set animal. Unlike most other hieroglyphic animals, the Set animal is not easily identifiable in the modern world. Today, Egyptologists agree that it was probably an imaginary animal of the time. Set is one of the most commonly used hieroglyphs in the ancient Egyptian language. It's used to form words that relate to items of chaos, such as violence, suffering, disturbance, and also for violent storms or tempests. The Pyramids of Mars was originally broadcast in 1975. It starred Tom Baker as the Fourth Doctor and Elizabeth Sladen as our plucky companion Sarah Jane Smith. When the story begins, the pair are headed for Unit HQ, but are pulled off course by an active portal to a time-space tunnel in 1911. They arrive at Unit HQ, but in 1911, when the building was owned by an archaeologist named Marcus Scarman. They discover that the time tunnel was being used by none other than the god of death himself, Sutekh, in order to free himself from the prison Horus placed him in centuries ago. Marcus Scarman, the archaeologist, unwittingly uncovered Sutekh's prison, hidden away in an underground chamber in Saqqara, Egypt, and was prominently possessed and turned into an instrument of Sutekh. With his new level of control over the outer world, Sutekh set his minion to unearth some ancient Osiran technology and reactivate a set of mummy-like service robots in order to build a pyramid-shaped rocket set to destroy the power source of his prison, called the Eye of Horus, housed within a pyramid on Mars. Once the rocket hit Mars, Sutekh would be free.
The world is facing the greatest peril in its history.
The forces that are being summoned into corporeal existence in that house are more powerful and more dangerous than anything even I have ever encountered. If Sutekh succeeds in freeing himself, the consequences will be incalculable.
Upon escaping Sutekh once and returning to the TARDIS, Sarah asks why they can't just leave, since they know Sutekh fails and the Earth is just fine in 1980. The Doctor takes her to 1980 to show her what her world would look like if they left now.
1980, Sarah, if you want to get off. Every point in time has its alternative, Sarah. You've looked into alternative time.
This is a pretty famous scene, and it was duplicated pretty closely in an episode earlier this season, The Devil's Cord, foreshadowing Sutekh's return. The Doctor and Sarah hatch a plan to plant an explosive and shoot it, thus destroying the rocket and Sutekh's chances for freedom. However, Sutekh uses the pure might of his mind to contain the explosion, although it costs him energy and he can't hold it for long. The Doctor realizes that he needs to break Sutekh's concentration, so he goes through the time corridor and confronts Sutekh face to face, distracting him enough to break his concentration and thus allow the explosive to detonate and destroy the rocket. Sutekh is furious and turns his vengeful gaze upon the Doctor. This is the famous scene that probably cements Sutekh in a lot of people's memories. The way he toys with the Doctor, delighting in his torture as he grills him for information, is intimidating.
You pit your puny will against mine. Kneel. Kneel before the might of Sutekh.
We rarely see the Doctor this powerless. Not a witty quip to be found. Gabriel Wolf's voice does a lot of the heavy lifting, imbuing Sutekh with a sadistic glee, his raspy voice oozing menace, with a slight warble here and there to hint at the off-kilter insanity bubbling just beneath the veneer of calm and aloofness.
Your evil is my good. I am Sutekh the Destroyer. Where I tread, I leave nothing but dust and darkness. I find that good.
Gabriel Wolf, who is now 91 years old, has reprised his role as Sutekh in these final two stories, playing the character for the first time since his initial appearance in 1975.
I am Sutekh, the god of death.
Sutekh discovers that the Doctor is a Time Lord and has a TARDIS, so he possesses the Doctor and uses the TARDIS to travel to Mars and destroy the Eye of Horus that way. He manages to succeed. And stands for the first time in centuries, gleefully pronouncing his plans to burn our world to a cinder. Sutekh steps into his time-space portal, ready to wreak havoc on the Earth. Fortunately, there's apparently a 2-minute delay in the radio signal from Earth to Mars, which the Doctor exploits to take the TARDIS back to Earth and rig the end of the time corridor to be set in the far future.
Release me!
No, Sutekh. The time of your sirens is long past.
Thus creating a tunnel that Sutekh could never live to reach the end of, essentially aging him to death. Or so he thought. Now, almost 50 years later, he waits no more. Sutekh, the god of death, has returned. He brings the gift of death to us all. We don't have all the pieces yet, but it looks like he hitched a ride on the TARDIS. He set an insanely elaborate trap for the Doctor, basically like a super mean prank to just rub in his face the fact that he doesn't know if his family's alive or not. He may very well be directly involved with Ruby Sunday as well, and the mystery of her parentage. Is it time for some wild theories? I think it is. Okay, so my head has been swirling for the past few days, ever since the Legend of Ruby Sunday dropped. All the new revelations, all the new questions that have been raised, and there's a lot to get through. There's a lot of new information that's been dropped, but I have what I feel is a working theory, a working prediction of how I think that the broad strokes, the main things are going to pan out at the end of the story. So I'll try to, as concisely as possible, explain each of my points of views on my predictions, and then give you like a final prediction of overall what's going to happen. So let's go.
That TARDIS is almost solid. If time is memory and memory is time, then what is the memory of a time machine?
The Doctor asks, if time is memory, then what is the memory of a time machine? And I think the answer to that is, it's a time machine. It's a real time machine. Bringing back the memory of a time machine manifests an actual time machine there, which is how I think Sutekh got into our realm. I think the Doctor and Ruby inadvertently unleashed Sutekh by playing this memory and realizing it to a real enough degree that they literally manifested the TARDIS in the past, which had the essence of Sutekh intertwined with it, but he couldn't break through and come out into our world yet, not until he was able to connect with the TARDIS memory. There's a very important line that Harriet Arbinger drops that I think is the key to this situation.
All this time he whispered, and delighted, and seduced, and the vessel did obey.
She says that a vessel was seduced. What is the vessel? Well, I believe that's the TARDIS. How is it seduced? Well, what if that memory of a TARDIS was not the real TARDIS, but was aware that it was only a temporal memory manifested into real existence for that brief moment that they had the VHS machine inside the time window? What if the TARDIS realized that and had an existential crisis? And in that moment, Sutekh, who was already secretly bound to the TARDIS, whispered sweet nothings into the TARDIS ear, said, I can manifest you, I can make you whole, I can make you real if you give yourself to me, right? Creepy, weird language like that. However, Sutekh would say it. It'd be all gross and sneaky, right?
Base yourself, you groveling insect.
And what if the TARDIS memory gave into that because it wanted to exist and live and allowed itself to become combined with Sutekh? And once Sutekh was able to combine his form with the time machine, it was like an anchor. It allowed him to anchor himself to this reality. Because I think what it was is he was in essence a spirit, a small sliver of him, a piece of him had somehow escaped from the eternal time tunnel he's trapped in and had managed to latch onto the TARDIS in some way. I'll get to that later, because the other thing is I think the story is a big time paradox. It's a bootstrap paradox, and I think we're going to see several events that occur in this finale episode that are going to lead forward backwards to be the cause of events that we saw at the beginning of the season. I know this all sounds timey-wimey crazy. I'm basing it off of my understanding of Russell T Davies's very science fantasy whimsical take on time travel and his emotional logic that brings these things into fruition. So I think that for whatever reason, that TARDIS is seduced by Sutekh. It allowed Sutekh to merge with it, and they were able to escape from the time window. He anchored himself to that and was thus able to pull himself, rip a hole in reality. The Doctor and Ruby in that moment freed Sutekh. But here's the thing. We started hearing the TARDIS groaning, and we started seeing instances of Susan Twist before the Church on Ruby Road. Way back in Wild Blue Yonder, that was the first instance, I believe, where you hear the TARDIS groan.
Is it working?
I think so. Strange.
And that's the first episode where you see Susan Twist. So here's my question for you. Let's assume that groaning means that Sutekh is already lashed onto the TARDIS at that point, okay? Sutech's already there. So my question to you, if Sutekh is already attached to the TARDIS at this point in Wild Blue Yonder, then what the heck happened to Sutekh when the Doctor did this to the TARDIS? Right? What happened to Sutekh if he was already there? Did it split? Are there two Sutechs now because there are two TARDISes? That seems very odd. It seems like it'd be hard to just they magically reproduced an entire ass time machine, but that was using, as far as I could tell, like the remnants of the Toymaker's power.
What if the Toymaker's domain is still lingering? Just for a few seconds while we're in a state of play.
I find it hard to imagine that the inferior god, the Toymaker, could somehow duplicate the superior god, Sutekh. So what happened in this split? What do I think happened in this split? Here's what I think happened. When the Doctor split the TARDIS into two TARDISes, I think he did split Sutekh. I think most of Sutekh remained on one TARDIS, but a small piece of Sutekh, a sliver of his soul, was torn away from him and kept in the second TARDIS. So now we have the TARDIS that Ncuti's tooling around in because he keeps hearing the groaning, so that's the TARDIS. That one has Sutekh on it. The second TARDIS, the 14th Doctor's TARDIS, has a sliver of Sutekh, but perhaps because it's only a small piece of Sutech's being, it is less powerful. Maybe it's less evil. Maybe it doesn't have his malice and his consciousness. Maybe it's a pure, fresh piece of God. You know what I mean? Does that make sense at all? This is all very fantastical and whimsical, but I'm trying to get into RTD's head here, okay? Perhaps the second TARDIS takes that piece of Sutekh and nurtures it and grows it and endows it with life and perhaps births it out of the Eye of Harmony or something. Kind of like how we saw the Eye of Harmony was able to revert someone back into a child state. Perhaps the Eye of Harmony also has the ability to create life, to manifest life. Kind of like how River Song was like a child, partially the TARDIS, that kind of weird thing. Maybe that's what's happening here. Maybe that baby that was manifested was then, in order to, say, prevent a paradox or something, they had to leave that baby on the Church on Ruby Road. And now we are getting into the meat of my main theory. But before that, I have one more thing I want to talk about, and that is Mrs. Flood. Mrs. Flood really threw me through a loop this last episode. You know, she's very, very hard to read.
I would love a cup of tea. Would you, sweetheart? Well, we'd all like a lot of things that aren't going to happen.
You know, she seemed very villainous. Like, who would deny this sweet old lady a cup of tea? What kind of a monster would do that? Which made me immediately think Ronnie, and then I slapped myself. But to be fair, like, I honestly do think that the way she's behaving is making me think she's a Time Lord. The fact that she knew what a TARDIS was, the fact that the front door of her house looks like the TARDIS, that has been a clear signifier in past stories that that is either the Doctor or related to the Doctor. And the fact that she knew about Sutekh already, so she has a higher level of awareness of alien goings-on. Now, I think they frame it to make you think that she's a minion of Sutekh, but I don't buy that at all. I think she's a third party. I think she is an independent actor who is not necessarily with the good guys, but is not working for Sutekh either. But she was aware Sutekh was coming. Okay, so who is Mrs. Flood? You know, could she be the Ronnie? Is the boss the Ronnie? We've heard the boss mentioned a few times, you know, both by Beep the Meep and by Rogue. The Ronnie does seem like someone who could have a diversification of projects, a lot of irons in the fire at the same time going on. Working with a war criminal here, you know, running a bounty hunting business there, and then camping out and observing Sutekh and his project for some diabolical scheme that she might have brewing. You know, I don't know. It could be the Ronnie, but let's put her aside for now, okay? This is Susan Foreman. I mean, you know, we've got the TARDIS. Again, the TARDIS connection. These all lead to the same few connections, by the way. Is it a Time Lord? Is it Susan? Is it the Ronnie? Is it the future version of, distant future version of the Doctor? Because she looks teary-eyed and she looks more horrified or like bracing herself for what's coming rather than like super excited the Sutekh's here. You know what I mean? So what have I landed on for that? Well, I think she is the TARDIS.
Never seen a TARDIS before.
I know, it sounds crazy, but this is not unprecedented either. In The Doctor's Wife, when the evil entity House possesses the TARDIS, the body of the TARDIS, they do that by kicking out the soul, the essence of the TARDIS, and temporarily planting it in the mind of a human woman. So that's been done before. That is a thing that can happen. Now, in that instance, the TARDIS was a much too huge and powerful of being to exist in that body for long, so the body died after a fairly short period of time. So you'd have to account for that, but maybe she's not human either. Maybe she's an alien that's able to house the TARDIS. Not giving poor Cherry her cup of tea seems like a villain move, but thinking back on how the TARDIS has treated other companions of the Doctor in the past, it actually doesn't feel that out of character for her. She can be a bit snippy and a bit sassy at times.
Where is it? I know it just happened. I went to the bathroom. Thank you for the hologram leopard, by the way, an unexpected pleasure, and my bedroom was completely missing. Just stop where you put it.
It's hard for me to picture someone like, say, Susan, the Doctor's granddaughter, suddenly turning and being a jerk like that, but I can definitely picture the Ronnie as a villain, or even the TARDIS as sort of a sassy jerk at times, saying that line as sort of a smokescreen to make you think she's a villain when she's really just kind of a jerk sometimes. I think she's the manifestation of the TARDIS, and I think it will be revealed that she's there to watch over Ruby. She will be the face and the voice of the mother that Ruby's been looking for this whole time. But, you know, speaking of Mrs. Flood, there's this one other element of her that's really bugging me, and that's the fact that she keeps breaking the fourth wall and talking directly to the camera. Now, that has a history in Doctor Who as well, which you may or may not be aware of. The Doctor himself has on multiple occasions broken the fourth wall. It's usually because the actor playing the Doctor was feeling a little too hammy, a little too excited about his role and turned to the camera and they just left it in there. It's a lost clip, unfortunately, but famously, William Hartnell turned directly to the camera and wished us all a Merry Christmas while he was having some drinks in one episode.
Incidentally, a Happy Christmas to all of you at home.
Just off the top of my head, I can remember two different instances of the fourth Doctor turning and breaking the fourth wall, so there's that. And then the Capaldi Doctor, of course, he's broken the fourth wall a few times. He had a whole conversation with us at the beginning of Before the Flood, which is ironic because he's specifically teaching us about the bootstrap paradox, which is what I believe this entire story is wrapped up in. So breaking the fourth wall, what does that mean? We've seen the Doctor do it in this season, but we've also seen Maestro do it. I think we've seen Toymaker do it. We've seen Ruby do it. One time at least, I definitely feel like both her and the Doctor were locking eyes directly with me while they were talking. okay? At the end of Boom. So I gotta keep my eyes peeled. If Sutekh looks directly into the camera, then I feel like my theory will be confirmed, okay? Because what I think is that looking into the camera, breaking the fourth wall, is a sign of godhood. That's right. I am on the Doctor is secretly a god train. And Ruby. I think they're both secretly gods. I feel like it makes sense for them to be gods because of all the types of entities that you could imagine being aware of the audience, being aware of another plane of existence that runs parallel to our own. Who else but gods would have that ability? So I feel like it's a very clever way to intertwine what was like just a bit of cute, cheeky humor that's sprinkled throughout the Doctor's timeline for the past 60 years, turning that into an actual element of a race of aliens or a race of beings that they have on the show. I think that's pretty cool if that's what it is. So what do I think is going to happen at the end of the story? Here's where the time paradox comes into play. I think that Sutekh, now that he has revealed himself and revealed his minions, is going to put his plan into action. And that means, before he's just been hitching a ride on the TARDIS. He hasn't been actively doing anything with it. He's just been riding it and it's been groaning occasionally. But now that he's revealed himself, I think he's going to actively utilize the power of the TARDIS. I think he's going to have Harriet Arbinger pilot the TARDIS for him, be his physical, meat puppet that flies the thing around. And I think he's going to also take Susan Triad with him. And now is the point where he's going to bring his whole planet into action backwards, because he's an evil genius god who can think forward and backward at the same time about these kinds of things. It's kind of like Tenet. All right. Now that he's at the end game, he's revealed himself and he's taking control of the TARDIS. Now he's going to take Susan Triad and go backwards in time, and he's going to hit up all the spots that he knows that the Doctor and Ruby stopped at during their travels because he was riding the TARDIS the whole time. He's going to go back in those time periods, and he's going to splinter Susan Triad into her multiple beings across the universe, kind of Clara style. However you can do, he's a god, he can do whatever. He's going to go and plant all the different Susan Triads in all the locations where the Doctor had his adventures, to make sure that they're at the right time at the right place to run into them in the future. Now that he's already gathered all his intel, seen where the adventure takes them, now he's taking the TARDIS and going backwards and planting his Susans, okay? That's one thing. The second thing is he was at the church on Ruby Road in the first place because he wanted to watch over his own daughter, his own flesh and blood, because he's a father. And even though he wants to destroy all of life in the universe, he sees this girl as still a part of him, a piece of Sutekh. And to destroy Sutekh, to kill any part of Sutekh, would be blasphemous, appalling to him, an abomination. So he was there essentially watching over his daughter. So from Sutekh's perspective, he somehow was able to free himself enough to have a ghostly hold on the TARDIS. And then he was taken in the TARDIS to Ruby Road, and he recognized and realized that was his daughter. Because of that, he was able to exploit the moment when they checked her tape later to tear a hole from the memory reality into our reality. I know that's kind of wobbly and weird, but that's kind of roughly how I see it happening. So what's going to happen in the end? I think the Doctor's going to realize that Sutekh is anchored to our reality through the TARDIS. And if we can separate him from the TARDIS, disentangle their forms, he will be pulled back into his time tunnel prison. Now, how is he going to disentangle them? I think he's going to realize the only way to do that is to intentionally damage time and space. I think he needs to go back over his timeline, his own time stream, what he said that he couldn't do in the last episode.
And I've been to Ruby Road once and I can't cross over my own history. The one night that we need to see, and I have time locked myself out of it.
But then we saw when you reverse the footage that there is a second TARDIS there parked 20 meters away. So the TARDIS did return at a different time. And the memories that the Doctor has of that night, of what happened, keep changing, which makes me think that time is shifting, time is damaged, time is constantly changing in that particular moment of time. The reason the Doctor's memory keeps changing and the reason the snow keeps occurring is because that moment in time is like an open wound. It's just torn open, and the memories and the physical environment and everything from that keeps bleeding backwards and reverberating out in all directions through time and hitting the Doctor and Ruby in waves, or manifesting when they're especially close in emotional attunement to the way they felt that night, thus connecting with their memories. Something like that. I think what the Doctor realizes is kind of like when the Ghostbusters realized they need to cross the streams at the end of the movie Ghostbusters. I think the Doctor is going to have to cross his own stream and tear a hole in time and space, cause an intentional paradox in that moment in order to disentangle the TARDIS and Sutekh. I just think that's the way he's going to do it. It has to be a violent time-space paradox shift to get him off of there. And I think the Doctor is going to try to do that, and I think the Doctor is not going to quite be able to make it. I think he's going to fail in his effort. Sutekh's still going to be hanging on by like a claw or something, and he'll be like, ha ha ha, you'll never be rid of me. And then Ruby's going to step up, and she's going to kind of like Rose at the end of the Parting of the Ways or whatever. She's going to unleash hidden godlike powers she has that she wasn't aware of, and she'll be the final nail in the coffin that pushes Sutekh off into the abyss and saves the day. And she's going to look directly at us into the camera, breaking the fourth wall, thus proving her godhood and my theory at the same time. So Ruby will be revealed to be a god. And what kind of god will she be? The god of time, of course. The new god of time will be birthed from the god of death. From the ashes rises a phoenix. That sort of thing. And that's why in 73 Yards, she was able to live all the way to death and then ride a ghostly apparition version of herself backwards in time and reset the timeline. That was her hidden ability manifesting in that moment. So based on my Mrs. Flood prediction, you would expect her to be the one carrying baby Ruby on the Church of Ruby Road, right? Wrong. I believe that that woman who's carrying baby Ruby is Ruby herself. I think the most obvious and probably first thought that a lot of people had when they saw that is in fact the correct one. I think that we are going to witness baby Ruby being born out of the TARDIS, possibly coming out of the Eye of Harmony or something, at the end of this story. And then Ruby is going to realize her origins, who her mother is, who her father is, and she's also going to realize that they have to take the baby back and put the baby there in order to have all the events that have played out play out the way that they are supposed to, which end with Ruby successfully vanquishing the god of death and saving the universe. In order to save the universe, Ruby must take her own baby version of herself and be the one who has to abandon herself and cause years of trauma, and the feelings of abandonment that Ruby struggled with her entire life end up being caused by a future version of herself. Thinking about it that way, it actually feels like 73 Yards is really foreshadowing of Ruby's fate in a lot of ways. In both stories, Ruby is the root of her own pain. But yes, Ruby in the end becomes a god. The god of time vanquishes Sutekh, discovers the origins of her parentage, and is forced to abandon her own baby version of herself, thus causing the trauma but also the triumph of the journey of her story to occur. Now, one other thing is that this theory basically says that the Doctor is definitely a god as well, because he's the one who breaks the fourth wall. He's the origin of that whole trope. Now, whether or not we're going to delve into his origins in this season finale, I doubt it. I think we're going to get the breadcrumb that the fourth wall breaking is a sign of being a god, and probably be able to connect that to the Doctor breaks the fourth wall. But then they're going to leave the Doctor's origins probably for the next season or two to cook. You know, that can be a longer form mystery. Seems like a lot to solve the mystery of Ruby Sunday and solve the mystery of the Doctor all in one episode. But I think they'll hint at it. So that's it. That is my crazy theory. I think I've mentioned everything about my theory. You may or may not buy into anything I said. I hope I didn't miss any important things, but if I did, please let me know in the comments below. That being said, please leave comments down below. Any sort of crazy theories you have, I'd love to hear them. I want to hear everyone's ideas. I want to be going into this brimming with anticipation of at least one thing I predict coming true. At least one. That'd be really cool. I've made a lot of predictions right here. Something's got to be right. Something does. But I talked long enough. There you go. That is the origins of Sutekh and my crazy theories about what I think is going to happen with Sutekh and Ruby Sunday and the Doctor this coming Friday. I am super hyped for this episode. I cannot wait to see it. And I will see you guys a few days after when I get my review out. So until then, Kay, signing out.